At exactly 11:42 p.m., a man disappeared from a luxury cruise, and no one noticed, except her. Emily Carter wasn't supposed to be on the upper deck that night, not with her shift ending in 10 minutes and her paycheck barely covering rent. But something about the silence pulled her there, wrong, heavy, like the ocean itself was holding its breath, and that's when she saw him, a stranger standing alone at the railing, completely still while the wind tore across the deck at nearly 30 miles per hour, his coat unmoving, his posture untouched, and just a few feet away, a guest leaned too far over the edge, laughing, careless, until suddenly he was gone. No scream, no splash, nothing. Like the ocean had erased him mid-breath, and Emily's heart slammed against her ribs as she stepped forward, scanning the water, expecting chaos, alarms, anything. But the ship stayed calm. The music below continued. The world didn't react. And when she turned back, the stranger was already looking at her, like he had been waiting for that exact moment, his eyes catching the moonlight for just a second, just long enough to flicker red, subtle, impossible. And then he spoke, his voice low, steady, almost gentle. You should go back inside. Like nothing had happened, like people disappeared every night, and Emily should have listened. Every instinct told her to walk away, to forget what she saw, but instead she took one step closer, because something about him didn't feel like danger. It felt like the truth she wasn't supposed to find, and that was the moment everything changed. No one remembers the exact moment the ocean decides to take something back, but I do. Emily Carter wasn't supposed to be on the upper deck that night, not with her staff badge tucked into her coat pocket and her shift ending in less than 10 minutes. But something about the silence pulled her there, the kind of silence that didn't belong on a $50 million cruise filled with music, laughter, and champagne glasses clinking every few seconds. And that's when she saw him standing alone at the railing, tall, still, untouched by the cold Atlantic wind whipping across the deck like it didn't reach him at all. And just a few feet away, a man leaned too far over the edge, laughing, careless, until suddenly he wasn't there anymore. No splash, no shout, just gone. Like the ocean had erased him mid-breath, and Emily froze, her heart skipping, her eyes snapping back to the stranger who hadn't moved, who hadn't even turned, and yet somehow she felt it, like he already knew she was watching. And when he finally looked at her, it wasn't panic she saw. It wasn't surprise. It was something else entirely, something calm, something ancient, something that made her take a step back without understanding why. And then he spoke, his voice low, steady, almost gentle. You should go back inside. And she should have. Every instinct screamed that she should, but instead she asked, did you see what just happened? And for a moment, just a fraction of a second, his eyes caught the moonlight and flickered red, not bright, not obvious, just enough to make her question her own vision. And then it was gone, replaced by something softer, something human. People lose their balance out here, he said, like it was normal, like it happened every night. And Emily shook her head because nothing about this felt normal. Not the missing man, not the silent deck, not the stranger whose presence seemed to bend the air around him. And when the wind cut through her thin coat, she shivered, just once, barely noticeable. But he saw it, of course he did. And before she could react, he stepped closer, removing his jacket and placing it over her shoulders with a carefulness that didn't match the coldness of his skin when it brushed her hand. And that's when she realized something even stranger than the disappearance. Something she couldn't explain, because whatever he was, whatever he had just witnessed, he wasn't cruel, he wasn't indifferent, he was kind, and that made him far more dangerous than anything she could understand. Emily did not return the jacket right away. Even when she stepped back into the golden glow of the ship's interior, where music resumed and voices filled the air like nothing had happened, because something about the cold fabric grounded her, reminded her that the man on the deck was real, not something her imagination had created in the dark, and yet everything around her insisted otherwise, because when security made a quiet announcement about a guest relocating to another suite, no one questioned it. No one seemed to notice that a person had simply vanished from existence. And when Emily tried to describe what she saw, the words felt fragile, incomplete, like they would break if she said them out loud. So instead she kept moving, back to her duties, back to the illusion of normal. But her eyes searched the crowd, and it did not take long to find him again, because he did not blend in. He did not laugh, did not drink, did not move like the others. He stood near the far end of the lounge, perfectly still, as if the entire room adjusted itself around him rather than the other way around. And when their eyes met this time, there was no surprise on his face, only recognition, as if he had expected her to look, as if he had been waiting for it, and Emily felt that same pull again, quiet but undeniable, drawing her closer despite every instinct telling her to stay away. And when she finally approached, returning the jacket with slightly trembling hands, she noticed details she had missed before, the absence of warmth in his skin, the way his reflection in the glass behind him seemed just a fraction delayed, the faint scent of something metallic beneath the ocean air. And yet his voice remained gentle when he spoke, asking if she was all right, as if her comfort mattered more than anything else in that moment. And that was what unsettled her most, because kindness should have made her feel safe. But instead it made everything more confusing, more dangerous. And when a wealthy guest nearby suddenly fell unsteady, collapsing into a chair with shallow breaths, panic rippling through the room, it was the stranger who moved first, faster than she could follow, his hand steady, his expression focused. And within seconds the man's breathing steadied, color returning to his face as if whatever had gone wrong had simply been undone, and the room relaxed, laughter returning in hesitant waves, explanations forming out of thin air. But Emily stood frozen, because she had seen it clearly this time, the impossible control, the unnatural precision. And when the stranger straightened, his gaze flickered back to her, not with pride, not with warning, but with something quieter, something almost weary. And in that moment she understood one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever he was hiding was not just a secret. It was an entire world she was not supposed to see. And yet somehow, she already had. Emily tried to convince herself that she was imagining things, that exhaustion from double shifts and sleepless nights had blurred the line between reality and something else. But the image refused to fade. The way he had moved, the way the room had bent around his presence, the way the impossible had simply corrected itself under his hand. And by the time her shift ended just past midnight, she found herself walking the corridors without direction, her mind replaying every second until it no longer felt like memory, but like a question demanding an answer. And somehow her feet carried her back to the upper deck again, to the same place where the ocean had swallowed a man without a trace. Except this time the air felt different, heavier, as if the silence itself was waiting, and he was already there. Of course he was, standing at the exact same spot, as if he had never left, as if time had simply paused for him while the rest of the world moved on. And when she stepped closer, she did not speak right away, because there was something fragile in the space between them, something that might shatter if she asked the wrong question. But he broke the silence first, his voice quieter than before, almost tired, asking why she had come back. And she did not have a good answer, not one that made sense. So she told the truth instead, that she could not stop thinking about what she saw, about what he did. And for a moment he said nothing, his gaze drifting out toward the dark horizon where the ocean stretched endlessly, black and unknowable. And when he finally spoke, it was not denial, it was not explanation, it was something far more unsettling. Some things are easier not to understand, he said, and Emily felt something shift inside her. Because that was not the response of someone hiding a lie. That was the response of someone carrying a truth too heavy to share. And the wind picked up again, colder this time, pressing against her like a warning. But she did not step back, did not look away. And instead she asked the question that had been building since the moment she saw his eyes glow in the dark. What are you? And the silence that followed stretched longer than before, long enough that she thought he might simply disappear the way the other man had. But then he turned to her fully, and for the first time there was something unguarded in his expression, something that looked almost human, almost vulnerable. And when he answered, his voice was steady but softer than the ocean around them. Someone who does not belong in your world. And it should have been enough. It should have been a warning she could walk away from. But instead it only pulled her closer, because whatever he was, whatever impossible truth stood in front of her. It was not the danger that held her there. It was the quiet, undeniable feeling that he had been alone for a very long time, and that for reasons she could not explain, he did not want to be anymore. Emily should have left after that, should have taken his warning and walked back into the safety of bright lights and ordinary conversations. But instead she stayed, because something about the way he said it lingered, not as a threat, but as a truth he had already accepted long ago. And she found herself asking another question before she could stop herself, asking how long he had been on this ship. And this time there was a faint shift in his expression, something almost like amusement, but quieter, more restrained, as if the idea of time itself did not quite apply to him the way it did to her. And when he answered, he did not give her a number, only said, "Long enough to know that it is not what it seems." And that was when Emily realized she was not the only one noticing the cracks beneath the surface, because she had felt it too. The missing names, the restricted areas, the way certain doors were always closed no matter the hour, and before she could press further, footsteps echoed behind them, sharp, deliberate, and the atmosphere shifted instantly, the air tightening in a way that made her chest feel heavy. And when she turned, she saw a group of elegantly dressed guests approaching, their movements too synchronized, their presence too controlled, and the moment they reached him, every single one of them lowered their gaze, not dramatically, not in a way that would draw attention, but just enough to signal something deeper, something ingrained. And Emily felt her pulse quicken as the realization settled in, because this was not coincidence, this was hierarchy, and whatever he was, he stood at the top of it, and yet he did not acknowledge them, did not return their silent gesture. Instead, his focus remained entirely on her, as if the rest of the world held no weight in that moment. And that was when one of them finally spoke, their voice careful, measured, addressing him with a single word that seemed to change everything. "Sir." And the way they said it carried more than respect, it carried certainty. And Emily felt the ground shift beneath her understanding, because she had been standing here thinking she had discovered a secret, when in reality she had barely scratched the surface. And when the group stepped back, fading into the background as quietly as they had arrived, she turned to him again, searching his face for confirmation, for denial, for anything that would make sense of what she had just witnessed. But he only watched her with that same steady gaze, and for the first time since she met him, there was no attempt to hide it, no effort to appear ordinary. And in that silence, Emily understood something she could not unsee. This was never just a stranger on a ship. This was someone who owned the silence itself, someone the ocean did not dare to challenge. And yet when he spoke again, his voice was softer than before, almost careful, as if what came next mattered more than everything that had already happened. "If you stay," he said, "you will start seeing things you cannot forget." And Emily realized she had already crossed that line the moment she chose not to walk away. Emily did not answer him right away, because the truth was already forming before she could put it into words. She had already seen things she could not forget, the missing man, the impossible control, the silent hierarchy that bent around him like gravity. And yet instead of fear pushing her away, it only deepened the pull, because none of it matched the quiet kindness in his voice. None of it matched the way he had noticed her shiver before she even felt it herself. And that contradiction refused to settle into something simple, something she could walk away from. So instead she stepped closer, just half a step, enough to feel the cold air shift between them, enough to prove to herself that she was still choosing this. And when she spoke, her voice was steadier than she expected, telling him that she was not afraid, not in the way he thought. And for the first time there was a flicker of something sharper in his expression, not anger, not warning, but something closer to disbelief, as if fear was the only response he understood from someone like her. And the silence stretched again, but this time it felt different, less like distance and more like something building beneath the surface. And then, without another word, he turned and began to walk, not away from her exactly, but toward a part of the deck she had not noticed before, a narrow passage leading down a level that was not marked on any of the guest maps. And Emily hesitated only for a second before following, because whatever line he had warned her about, she had already crossed it, and there was no pretending otherwise now. And as they moved further from the main deck, the sounds of music and conversation faded completely, replaced by the low, constant hum of the ship cutting through miles of open ocean, and the lighting shifted too, softer, dimmer, casting long shadows that made the space feel less like part of a luxury cruise and more like something hidden beneath it, something older. And when he finally stopped, it was in front of a door that should not have been there, unmarked, unguarded. And yet the moment he reached for it, Emily felt it again, that subtle pressure in the air, like the world itself was paying attention, and he paused just long enough to look back at her, giving her one last chance to turn around, one last chance to stay in the version of reality she understood, but she did not move, did not step back, and that was all the answer he needed. And when the door opened, it revealed not another hallway, not another part of the ship, but something else entirely, something that did not belong to the world above. And as Emily stepped forward into that unknown space, she realized with absolute clarity that this was never just a journey across the ocean. It was a crossing into something far deeper, far darker, and far more personal than she had ever imagined. The moment Emily stepped through the doorway, the air changed completely, not colder, not warmer, but heavier, like the space itself carried weight that the world above did not, and she felt it settle over her shoulders, pressing just enough to remind her that she was somewhere she did not belong, somewhere no guest was ever meant to see. And when she looked around, it was not what she expected, not a hidden engine room or a maintenance corridor, but something far more deliberate, a long hall, lined with dark, polished walls that reflected light like still water, stretching deeper than the size of the ship should have allowed. And the silence here was absolute. No music, no distant voices, not even the hum of the ocean, just the soft echo of her own footsteps and his, steady, unhurried, as if he had walked this path countless times before. And Emily realized then that this was not an accident, not something hidden out of convenience. This place existed by design, for a purpose she could not yet understand. And as they moved forward, figures began to appear at the edges of the corridor, not approaching, not speaking, but watching, their presence quiet yet unmistakable. And just like before, each one lowered their gaze as he passed, not dramatically, not in fear, but with a practiced acknowledgement that spoke of something ancient, something structured. And Emily's pulse quickened because she was no longer guessing, no longer piecing together fragments. She was standing inside the truth itself, and still he did not look at them, did not respond, as if their presence was expected, irrelevant, secondary to something else. And that something was her, and the realization made her breath catch because it did not make sense, not in any world she understood. And when they reached the end of the hall, the space opened into a vast chamber that should not have fit inside a ship, ceilings rising higher than the decks above could allow, dim light reflecting off surfaces that looked carved rather than built. And at the center stood a single elevated platform, simple yet commanding, not ornate, not decorated, but powerful in its emptiness. And Emily stopped without meaning to, her instincts finally catching up with everything she had ignored. Because this was no longer just strange, this was undeniable. And he turned to her then, fully, no distance left between them, no pretense. And for the first time since she met him, there was no attempt to soften what he was, no attempt to appear human. And yet, his voice remained the same, calm, steady, almost careful as he spoke. "This is where my world begins." And Emily felt the weight of those words settle deeper than the air around her, because she understood what he meant, not just physically, but entirely. And when she looked at him now, truly looked, she saw it clearly, not just the pale skin, not just the unnatural stillness, but the quiet authority that shaped everything around him. The reason the others lowered their eyes, the reason the silence bent instead of breaking, and the truth rose in her chest before she could stop it, not as fear, not as panic, but as something far more dangerous, understanding. Because whatever he was, whatever world he ruled beneath the surface of this ship, he had not brought her here by accident, and that meant she was already part of something she could not step away from anymore. Emily did not move closer to the platform, not yet, because something in the air told her that crossing that distance would mean more than just a step forward. It would mean accepting everything she had already seen as real, as permanent, and for the first time since she followed him below the surface of the ship. Hesitation found her, quiet but firm, pressing against the certainty she had carried this far, and he noticed it immediately. Of course he did, his gaze shifting slightly, not in impatience, not in disappointment, but in recognition, as if hesitation was something he understood better than anyone. And when he spoke again, his voice was lower, more measured, as though each word carried weight beyond its sound. "You can still leave," he said, and the simplicity of it struck her harder than anything else he had shown her, because it was not a command, not a warning. It was a choice, real and unforced, and that made it more difficult, not easier. And Emily exhaled slowly, her eyes drifting across the chamber once more, taking in the silent figures at the edges, the way they remained still yet aware, the way their attention shifted not toward her, but always back to him. And she realized something she had not fully understood until now. This was not just his world. This was a world that moved because of him, a world that existed in alignment with his presence. And yet he stood there offering her the option to walk away from it, to forget it, to return to something simpler. And that contradiction tightened in her chest, because someone who held that kind of power did not need to offer choices. And yet he did, and that told her more than anything else. And when she finally looked back at him, there was no fear left in her expression, only clarity, because the truth had already settled. She had seen too much, felt too much, and more than that, she had understood something she could not ignore, that whatever he was, whatever world he ruled beneath the surface of everything ordinary, he was not the kind of danger she had been taught to fear, and that realization was what carried her forward, one step, then another, closing the distance between them until she stood just at the edge of that platform. And the moment she did, the shift was immediate, subtle but undeniable, the figures around the chamber straightening slightly, the silence deepening, as if the space itself acknowledged the movement, and Emily felt it, not as pressure, but as awareness, as if she had just been seen by something far larger than the room itself. And when she turned to him again, there was no question left to ask, only one truth to face. And he held her gaze without looking away, without softening it this time. And in that moment, the distance between human and something beyond it disappeared entirely, replaced by something far more dangerous, connection, because he did not need to say it. She could feel it clearly now. She had not been brought here to witness. She had been brought here to choose, and whatever came next would not be something she could undo. The moment Emily stepped fully onto the platform, the air shifted in a way that could not be explained, not louder, not brighter, but deeper, as if the space itself had recognized her presence and adjusted accordingly. And she felt it settle beneath her feet, not unstable, but undeniable, like standing at the center of something vast and unseen. And the figures along the edges of the chamber no longer looked past her. They acknowledged her now, subtly, almost imperceptibly, but enough that she could feel the change, and her breath caught because this was no longer about observation, no longer about curiosity. This was inclusion, and she turned to him instinctively, searching for confirmation, for explanation, for anything that would ground her in something familiar. But he did not offer either, his expression steady, unreadable, as if this moment had always been inevitable, as if her presence here was not a disruption, but a continuation of something already set in motion long before. She stepped onto that ship, and when he spoke, his voice carried differently now, not louder, but resonating through the space in a way that made every word feel anchored. "You feel it," he said, not as a question, but as a certainty, and Emily swallowed, because she did. She felt something beneath everything else, something ancient, something watching, something aware of her in a way she could not ignore, and it was not fear that rose in her chest. It was something else entirely, something closer to understanding, and that frightened her more than anything else could have, because it meant she was not resisting it anymore. She was accepting it, piece by piece, without even realizing when the shift had happened. And she took a slow breath, forcing herself to focus, to stay grounded, and asked the only thing that still made sense. Why her? And for the first time, something in his gaze softened, not into weakness, but into something far more dangerous, honesty. And he stepped closer, not enough to close the distance completely, but enough that she could feel the cold of his presence again, sharp against the warmth of her own skin. And when he answered, his voice was quieter than before, almost careful. "Because you saw me," he said, and the simplicity of it struck her harder than anything else, because it was not about destiny, not about fate, not about anything grand or impossible. It was about a moment, a single choice, a single glance that had not turned away when it should have. And everything that followed had unfolded from that. And Emily felt the weight of that realization settle into something permanent, because it meant this was not random. It was not accidental. It was a path she had stepped onto herself, and before she could respond, a subtle movement rippled through the chamber, not chaotic, not urgent, but deliberate, as if something had shifted beyond the walls of this hidden world, and his attention changed instantly, not leaving her, but expanding beyond her, as if he was listening to something she could not hear. And for the first time since she met him, there was tension in his stillness, controlled but unmistakable. And when he spoke again, the softness was gone, replaced by something colder, sharper, not directed at her, but at whatever had just entered his awareness. They should not have found this place, he said quietly, and Emily felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air, because whatever he had just sensed, whatever was coming, it was not part of the world she had just stepped into. It was something that did not belong even here, and suddenly the choice she had made did not feel like an ending. It felt like the beginning of something far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. The silence did not break. It shifted, tightening around the chamber like something unseen had drawn closer, and Emily felt it before she understood it. The subtle pressure in the air sharpening into something more focused, more deliberate, as if whatever existed beyond this hidden world had just turned its attention toward them, and the figures along the edges of the chamber reacted instantly, not with panic, not with chaos, but with precision, their stillness becoming alert, their presence aligning in a way that spoke of preparation rather than fear. And for the first time since she stepped into this place, Emily realized that this world, his world, was not invincible. It could be reached, it could be found, and whatever was coming had done exactly that. And she turned to him instinctively, searching his face for the calm she had come to recognize. But what she found instead was something deeper, something colder, not fear, never fear, but awareness sharpened into intent. And when his gaze met hers, it did not waver, did not retreat, and yet there was something unspoken in it, something that made her chest tighten before he even spoke. "You should not have been here when this happened," he said, his voice low, controlled, but carrying a weight that had not been there before, and Emily felt the truth of it settle immediately, because this was no longer just about discovery, no longer just about crossing a line she could not return from. This was about consequence, about being seen in a moment she was never meant to witness. And yet even then, even with that understanding, she did not step back, did not move away from him, because something stronger held her in place, something that had been building since the moment she first saw him standing alone against the ocean. And before she could respond, the chamber shifted again, not physically, but perceptibly, like a ripple moving through something far larger than the space itself, and a low resonance filled the air, not a sound she could hear clearly, but something she could feel, deep and steady, like a warning carried through the bones of the ship, and the figures along the walls lowered themselves slightly, not in fear, but in acknowledgement of something greater, something approaching. And Emily's breath caught as she realized that whatever this was, it commanded even them, even this hidden world beneath the surface. And slowly, deliberately, she turned back to him, her voice quieter now, steadier despite everything, asking what was coming. And for the first time since she met him, he did not answer immediately, his gaze shifting past her, beyond the chamber, as if measuring something she could not see. And when he finally spoke, his voice was softer than the tension surrounding them, but far more certain. "Something that will not ignore you," he said, and the words settled into her like a final realization, because she understood then that this was no longer about him alone, no longer about the secret she had uncovered or the world she had stepped into. It was about her, about the fact that she had been seen, chosen, placed at the center of something she could not yet understand. And as the unseen presence drew closer, as the air itself seemed to hold its breath in anticipation, Emily Carter realized that whatever happened next would not just change her life, it would define it,